The throne room of the Vathiri Empire was not a place built for comfort. It was built for power. The stone walls were dark and old. The ceiling rose so high that the top of it disappeared into shadow. Long banners hung from iron rods, deep blue and silver, marked with the symbol of the empire, a six-pointed star with a single eye at its center. The air was cold and still, the way tomb is cold and still. Every sound echoed. On this particular morning, the room was full. Court officials stood in neat rows along the sides. Ambassadors from 3 neighboring systems sat in carved chairs near the front. Scribes held their writing tools, ready to record whatever was said. Guards in dark armor stood at every door, unmoving. Everyone was dressed well. Everyone was quiet. Everyone was waiting. The occasion was considered a happy one. Princess Solene, third heir to the Vathiri throne, was to have her betrothal formally announced before the court. The match had been arranged with Lord Pethin of the Morovin cluster, powerful noble from the eastern edge of the empire. The union was political, as most royal unions were, but it was also considered wise. It would bring 2 great families together and give the empire stronger control over trade routes near the Morovin border. Diplomats had worked for nearly 2 decades to reach this point. Today was meant to be a celebration. Empress Freya sat at the far end of the room on the high throne. She was a tall woman, lean and still, with silver hair pulled back tightly from her face. Her skin was pale blue, the color of ice near water. Her eyes were dark gold, and they missed nothing. She had ruled for 63 years. She had seen wars, treaties, betrayals, and celebrations. She had learned to keep her face calm no matter what she felt inside. She wore a long black robe with silver thread along the edges and a crown of black stone set with a single pale gem at the center. She watched the doors at the far end of the hall. They opened. Princess Selene walked in alone. She was young, 24 years old by veil. Fairy counting, but she did not walk like someone young. She walked slowly and straight with her hands held loosely at her sides. Her robes were deep green, which was unusual. Most would have worn ceremonial white for a betrothal announcement. Her dark hair was down, not pinned. She wore no jewelry except for a small silver ring on her right hand, which Northwest one in the court recognized. She crossed the long floor without hurrying. The sound of her footsteps was the only sound in the room. She stopped at the center of the hall, bowed her head once toward her mother, and then raised it and was still. The court waited for the formal words. The scribes readied their pens. Ambassador Voss, who had arranged the betrothal, allowed himself a small, satisfied expression. Selene opened her mouth and said, "I cannot accept the betrothal to Lord Pethin." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from the one before. The earlier quiet had been calm. This one had a sharp edge to it, like glass. No one moved. One scribe slowly lowered his pen, without seeming to realize he was doing it. Selene did not look around the room. She kept her eyes on her mother. "I have thought about this for a long time," she continued, her voice even, her words clear. "I have not come to this decision quickly or carelessly. I know what this arrangement means. I know what it costs to build. I do not refuse it out of stubbornness or personal feeling. I refuse it because I am carrying a debt that this court does not know about, and I cannot, in good conscience, enter a formal alliance or stand here as a representative of this empire while the debt remains unspoken. Ambassador Voss made a sound that was almost a word, then stopped himself. Wraith had not moved at all. Not a hand. Not an eye. She sat the way mountains sit, completely still and completely present. "What debt?" the Empress said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. In that room with those walls, it reached every corner without effort. "A debt of life," Solon said. "Someone saved mine. Not a Vaith Ferry soldier. Not a guard or a diplomat or anyone this court would expect. A human. A cargo pilot. A man who had no reason to help me and every reason to leave me behind." She let that sit for a moment. The word human had moved through the room the way a cold draft moves under a door. Several of the nobles exchanged glances. One of the ambassadors shifted in his chair. Humans were known to the Vaith Ferry, of course. They were a young species, common in the outer trade routes, useful in certain technical roles, tolerated, but not particularly respected. No one in that room had ever expected to hear the word spoken in this context. "His name," Solon said, "is Cal Drummond." She said it plainly. No ceremony. No reverence. Just the name as a fact. "He's a cargo pilot who worked the colonial freight routes near the Sarath Expanse. He is 29 years old. He is from a small city in a country called Montana on the human home world. He does not know I am standing here right now. He does not know that anything I am saying today has anything to do with him." The Empress's gold eyes moved over her daughter's face for a long moment. "Then you will explain," Wraith said, "exactly who this person is, and exactly what he did. And you will begin now." Solon nodded once. "Yes," she said, "I will." And the court, which had come to witness a betrothal, settled in instead for something none of them had prepared for. A story about a burning ship, a sealed door, and a human man who went back when every reasonable instinct said to run. The ship was called the VSS Orden. It was not a grand vessel. It was a mid-size colonial freighter, wide in the middle, slow at full load, built for practical work rather than elegance. It carried food supplies, building materials, and medical equipment to Valthyri outpost settlements on the far side of the Seraph Expanse. It made the run 3 times a year. It was considered a routine assignment. Solon had boarded it quietly, without announcement. She was traveling without her title, using a secondary identity. The Imperial office had prepared for inspection trips. She wanted to see the colonial as they actually were, not as they were arranged to appear during official visits. Only the ship's captain knew who she really was. Everyone else saw a minor administrative official on a routine journey. Cal Drummond and his co-pilot Dana Holt were contracted cargo handlers for this particular run. They had their own small shuttle docked in the freighter's lower bay, used for moving cargo between the ship and smaller stations that could not accommodate the full freighter. It was the kind of work they had done for years, unglamorous, steady, and reliable. Cal was good at his job. He did not overthink things. He assessed a situation, figured out what needed doing, and did it. Dana was different in style, but matched Him incompetence. She talked more. She complained more. She also noticed things faster than almost anyone Cal had ever worked with. The two of them had been flying together for 6 years, and they operated the way people do when they have worked closely for a long time with very few words needed. The explosion happened on the third day. Out from the last way station. A cascade failure in the propulsion core. Later investigators would determine it was caused by a faulty valve seal that had been repaired with substandard materials at a maintenance stop 8 months earlier. The failure was sudden. The core vented heat faster than the ship's suppression systems could manage. The fire that followed moved quickly through the lower decks. The captain and 2 senior crew members were in the engine section when it happened. They did not survive the first minutes. Cal felt it before he heard it, a deep shudder through the floor of the cargo bay, the kind that means something has gone very wrong with something large. Then came the sound, a low heavy boom, followed by a rising alarm tone, and then the ship's emergency lighting switched from white to red. That's a fire event, Dana said. She was already moving toward the panel on the wall. Engine section, Cal said, reading the indicators. Core failure. It's bad. They moved fast. Cal pulled up the ship's schematic on the wall display. Fire suppression was active in 3 sections but not keeping up. 2 deck sections were already sealed off automatically. The crew quarters level was showing partial containment. The cargo bay they were standing in was still clear for now. We need to go, Dana said. Escape pod corridor is 2 levels up. Port side. Still clean. Cal was already heading for the door. They moved up the corridor together, past warning lights and the sound of distant crashing as something collapsed. In a lower section, they reached the junction that led to the pod corridor. Cal stopped. He had heard something. It was faint under the noise of the alarm, but it was there, an emergency transponder signal. A personal one, the kind built into crew and passenger suits. It was coming from behind them, from the direction of the sealed cargo section they had just passed. Someone's alive back there, he said. Dana listened. She heard it too. The blast door sealed automatically. She said, the controls for that section are gone. I saw the board, and that whole section is filling with heat bleed from the core. Cal, I know, he said. The temperature in there is going to be unsurvivable in about 12 minutes. Maybe less. I know, he said again. And the door controls are fried. You cannot open that door from the outside normally. Cal was already turning around. Dana grabbed his arm. Cal, listen to me. There is nothing. There's a cargo loader in Bay 3. He said, hydraulic brace system. I can use it to force the emergency release on the secondary panel. It's manual. It won't be fast, but it'll work. She stared at him. You read that in a manual 2 years ago. Yeah. You might not make it back out. He looked at her directly. Get to the pod. Keep it ready. I'll be back in 10 minutes. She let go of his arm. She did not look happy. She also knew him well enough to know that there was no version of this conversation in which he walked away from a live transponder signal. The cargo loader was a heavy machine, slow-moving, built for shifting freight. Containers. Cal used it the way it was not designed to be used, positioning its hydraulic arm against the blast door's emergency release housing and applying steady pressure while he manually rerouted a coolant line from the secondary circuit to bleed heat away from the door's locking mechanism. He had to do this with his bare hands, working by feel in the red emergency light. The metal was hot. His left arm and shoulder took the worst of it, a long burn from elbow to shoulder where he held the line in place long enough for the system to respond. He did not stop. The door released. Steam poured out. He went in. The woman was near the far wall, on the floor, conscious but barely. A head wound from when the explosion's force had knocked her against a storage rack. She was Vale Ferry. She was dressed simply, nothing that marked her as anyone important. She was trying to stand and failing. Cal did not ask questions. He picked her up, got her over his shoulder and moved. They made it to the pod corridor with 40 seconds to spare before the cargo section became uninhabitable. Dana had the pod ready. She pulled them both in and launched it before either of them was fully seated. The freighter's core went completely. A few minutes later, a silent bloom of light at a distance. The pod drifted. Inside it, Dana was already treating Cal's burns with the pod's medical kit, telling him in a low, fierce voice exactly what she thought of his decision-making. Cal sat still and let her. He was looking at the woman he had pulled out. She was awake now, sitting with her back against the wall, looking at him. "What is your name?" she asked. Her voice was quiet but clear. He told her. She did not tell him hers. He did not ask. He had already turned back to check the distress beacon. It was transmitting. Signal good. Estimated response time 4 to 6 hours. He noted this and filed it away and moved on to the next thing that needed doing, which was rationing the pod's water supply for the wait. 3 hours later, a Vale Ferry military vessel answered the beacon. It took the woman off the pod first, quickly, with an urgency that struck Dana as unusual for the rescue of an administrative official. Cal noticed it too, but said nothing. He and Dana were processed at the nearest way station. Their cargo contract was voided due to the loss of the ship. They were compensated at the standard rate for contracted personnel in emergency situations. The paperwork took 2 days. Then they were released and they went and found another job, and the whole thing became a story they told, occasionally in docking bays and rest stops when the subject of bad runs came up. Cal never thought about it as anything more than that. The throne room had become very still in a different way than before. Earlier it had been the stillness of people waiting for something expected. Now it was the stillness of people who had just heard something they did not know how to place, something that had landed in the room like a stone into water, and all of them were watching the rings spread. Solon had not moved from the center of the floor. She stood the same way she had since she entered, straight, calm, her hands at her sides. She had just finished telling the court what happened aboard the VSS Arden. She had told it simply, without decoration, temperature readings, time windows, the door, the coolant reroute, the cargo loader, the burns. She had told them that Cal Drummond did not know who she was. She said this part twice, not louder the second time, just Clearly, because she knew what some of them were thinking. She had thought it herself in the first hours after the rescue, when her mind was still foggy from the head wound and she was trying to make sense of what had happened. She had wondered if he had recognized her somehow, if this had been a calculated act for political advantage. She had looked into it carefully in the months that followed. Cal Drummond had no connections to the Imperial Court. He had never worked a contract that brought him into contact with Veil Theory officials of any rank. He could not have known her face. He had not asked for her name. In the records of the incident, he was listed as a contracted cargo handler who survived an accident and was released with standard compensation. There was no note of anything unusual from the Empire's side of the paperwork. What he had done was invisible. She told the court all of this. Ambassador Voss was the first to speak. He was a careful man, tall, silver-haired, with the measured voice of someone who had spent decades in rooms where the wrong word could end a career. He cleared his throat and said, in a tone that was respectful but firm, that while the princess's experience was clearly significant, it would perhaps be a mistake to draw large conclusions from a single event. Individuals acted on instinct in emergencies. It did not necessarily reflect anything broader about the humans as a people. Saw Lin turned to look at him. She let a moment pass. Then she asked in a voice that was completely level, how many Valerie nobles do you believe would have gone back through that door, Ambassador? Voss opened his mouth. He closed it. Not in theory, she added. Not in the abstract. With the controls gone. With the temperature already rising. With a clear path to safety behind them. How many would have turned around? No one answered. The question stayed in the room. Saw Lin did not press it. She did not need to. She turned back to face the Empress and continued. I am not asking this court to place humans above us, she said. I am not asking for a treaty or a change in trade policy or an adjustment to the colonial agreements. I am asking for something much smaller and much more important. I am asking this empire to look clearly at what it already knows about humans and to stop choosing not to see it. A murmur moved through court. Not a hostile one. Something more uncertain. One of the older nobles near the left wall, a woman named Countess Chevra, who had been in the court longer than most, and who rarely spoke in open session, said quietly but audibly, she is not wrong that we have looked away. Several heads turned. Chevra did not add anything more. But the words had been said. Brita had still not spoken. She had not moved. She sat on the high throne the way she always sat, with the posture of someone who had long ago stopped needing to remind others that she was in charge. She did not need to lean forward or shift or make any gesture. She simply watched. Her gold eyes moved from her daughter to the court and back again. She was processing. Those who had served her long enough recognized it. It was in the very quality of her stillness, not the stillness of disinterest, but the stillness of a mind working quickly and quietly behind a face that showed nothing. Solon had more to say, and she said it. She told them that she had spent the 18 months since the rescue doing something that no one in the Imperial Court had asked her to do, and no one had encouraged. She had read everything available about humans, not the summaries prepared by the diplomatic office which were useful but brief. The longer records, the historical accounts, the military evaluations made during the early contact period, the reports from Vale ferry merchants who worked the human trade routes. What she had found was consistent, not in every detail, but in a pattern. Humans, when faced with a situation that required them to act for the benefit of others at a cost to themselves, acted more often than the pattern suggested. They should, more often than cold reasoning would predict. They acted for strangers. They acted for members of other species. They acted when no one was watching and there was no reward waiting on the other side. We have cataloged this, she said, and called it volatility. We have called it impulsiveness. We have said it makes them unpredictable. And that is true, they are less predictable than we are. But there is another word for what they do. We have simply preferred not to use it. Another silence. Longer this time. Voss tried once more. Princess, the court understands your gratitude. Gratitude is. This is not gratitude, Solene said, and her voice had an edge in it now, not anger but precision, the way a blade has an edge. Gratitude is what I owe to one man. What I am asking this court to consider is a question of accuracy. We have formed a picture of a species, and that picture has gaps in it that we have never bothered to fill. I am suggesting that this is no longer acceptable, not to me, and not, I think, to anyone in this room who is willing to be honest. She stopped talking. The room stayed quiet. Breatha's eyes had not left her daughter's face. The Empress's expression was as still as ever, but something behind those gold eyes had shifted, some small and private adjustment, the kind that only happens when a person hears an argument they cannot immediately find a way around. She had heard many arguments in 63 years of rule. She knew what a good one felt like. This was a good one. Breatha dismissed the court with a single word and a small movement of her hand. They filed out without protest, even Voss, who left with his mouth pressed into a thin line and his eyes carrying the particular look of a man who knows he has lost something but has not yet worked out how much. The great doors closed. The throne room was suddenly a much smaller place. Just the Empress and her daughter, and the cold still air, and the sound of nothing. Breatha descended from the throne. This itself was notable. She rarely came down during audiences. She moved across the dark stone floor until she was standing a few feet from Solon, and for a long moment the two of them simply looked at each other, not as Empress and Princess, but in the more complicated way of a mother and a daughter who have not spoken honestly in a long time. Sit down, Breatha said. They sat together on the low stone steps that led up to the throne dais. It was an undignified place to sit, and both of them knew it, and neither of them mentioned it. You have planned this for some time, Breatha said. It was not a question. Yes, Solon said. Since the ship. Before that, actually. Since I was on the rescue pod. I was still dizzy from the head wound. And I kept thinking, I need to tell someone about this. And then I thought, tell them what? Exactly. And I could not answer that question. For a long time. Breatha was quiet, listening. It took me almost a year, Solon said, to understand what I had actually seen. Not just a man helping a stranger. I have seen that. We all have. What I had seen was something more specific. I had seen someone stand at the edge of a clear path to safety, hear a signal from behind a sealed door, and make a choice. Not slowly, not with debate. He just turned around, as if there was never any question. People act on instinct in crises, Breatha said. The words were measured, careful, not dismissive but testing. Solon looked at her. That is what Voss said. I know what Voss said. I am saying it now for a different reason. I am saying it because it is the obvious explanation, and I want to hear why you do not accept it. Solon thought for a moment. Because instinct in a crisis takes you towards safety. Every living thing does that. It moves away from danger towards survival. What he did was the opposite. He was already at safety. He turned back toward danger. That is not instinct. That is a choice. A real one made clearly with full understanding of what it cost. Braith said nothing. She folded her hands in her lap. He knew the door controls were gone, so Len continued. His partner told him the temperature was rising and the time was short and that it was probably fatal to go back. He heard all of that. And he went anyway because someone was alive behind that door, and he was the person standing in the corridor. He said, I heard him say it later, too. His partner, when she was treating his burns, he said there was a problem that had a solution. He was talking about me as a problem that had a solution. Something in Braith's face moved very slightly. That sounds like a small thing to say. She said, it is the most serious thing I have ever heard, Solon said. Because it means that for him, leaving someone behind was not even a full option. It was a problem with a solution, and he was the one who could solve it. That is not instinct. That is a way of being in the world. Braith stood up slowly and walked a few steps away, her hands still folded. She stood with her back to Solon for a moment, looking at the far wall. You could have told me this privately, she said. You did not have to do it in open court, in front of the ambassadors, with the betrothal on the table. No, Solon said. I could not. Because this is not just about me. If I told you quietly and you listened quietly and then nothing changed, that would be the same as saying it did not matter. I needed it to be part of the record. I needed it to be said out loud in the room where decisions are made. Because if our empire is going to look at humans differently, it has to start somewhere. That cannot be quietly put away in a file. A long silence. Where is he now? Breatha asked. The question was quiet, almost soft. And it was, Solon recognized, the question of someone who had moved from resisting an argument to trying to understand the subject of it. Outer colonies, Solon said. I checked. He is still flying freight routes. He took a new contract 2 months after the accident. He is working near the Delvan system now. She paused. He does not know any of this is happening. He probably has not thought about the incident in months. Breatha turned back around. She stood there and looked at her daughter, and in the line of her face, not in any expression that would be legible to anyone watching, but in the slight dropping of the tension she always carried in her jaw, in the way her eyes were now looking slightly past Solon, rather than directly at her, which was what she did when she was thinking. Rather than deciding, Solon could see That something had changed, not surrendered. Breatha did not surrender things, but she had moved. Whatever certainty she had walked into, this room carrying, she was not holding it as tightly now. He went back, the Empress said at last, as if testing the sentence, as if hearing it for the first time even, though she had heard it 3 times already. He went back, Solon said. Breatha looked at the far doors. An empire that has all the information, she said quietly, to no one in particular, and chooses not to look at. Part of it is not in fact as well informed as it believes itself to be. She did not say anything else. But Solon, who had known her mother for 24 years and had learned to read what she left unsaid, understood that this was not the end of the conversation. It was the beginning of something else, something larger and harder and long overdue. 3 days passed. The court was quiet in the way courts get quiet when everyone is waiting to see what will happen next, busy on the surface with ordinary things, but attentive underneath, ears turned toward any signal from the Empress. The signal came on the 4th morning. 2 directives were issued from the imperial office, both carrying Breath's personal seal. They were not announced publicly. They were delivered by messenger to the relevant offices and entered into the record without ceremony. The first placed the betrothal negotiations with Lord Pethan of the Marovin cluster on indefinite hold, pending further review of alliance terms. It was worded carefully, nothing that constituted an insult to the Marovin family, nothing that closed any doors permanently. Just a pause. Diplomatic language for not now. The second directive instructed the Imperial Intelligence Division to compile a full assessment of human civilization, not the standard diplomatic summary. Those already existed and were updated every few years. Something more thorough. Historical records, behavioral accounts from Vale Ferry, merchants, soldiers, and officials who had direct contact with humans. Specific attention to be paid to documented instances of humans acting in crisis or conflict situations. The assessment was to be treated as a priority project and presented to the Empress personally upon completion. Solon heard about both directives before noon. She read the summaries twice, folded them, set them on her desk, and sat quietly for several minutes. She had not expected her mother to move this quickly. She had hoped. She had argued as clearly as she knew how, but hope and argument were not the same as certainty, and she had spent the last 3 days half convinced that she had misread the moment in the throne room, that what she had seen in her mother's face was not movement but the particular stillness of a decision already made and merely not yet announced. She'd been wrong. Her mother had moved. It was not everything. Solon knew that. The assessment would take time. The betrothal pause was not a refusal. Nothing had been declared or proclaimed. The empire had not changed, but a very old and very certain institution had asked itself a question it had not asked before, and that was not nothing. That was, in its way, everything. She sat at her desk for a while longer. Then she picked up a writing tool and began composing a letter. Cal was in a docking bay on a transit station orbiting a gas giant in the outer Delvin Reach when the message arrived. The station was called Waypoint 11, though no one ever called it that. Everyone who worked the outer routes called it the nail for the long, narrow shape of its main corridor. It smelled of fuel and recycled air in the particular kind of grease that collects in machinery that never fully cools down. He was running pre-flight checks on a new cargo shuttle, a short-range hauler he had recently contracted for a 3-month supply run to 4 small outpost settlements. Dana was outside the bay dealing with a loading dispute. Cal had a checklist and a stylus and was working through it methodically, crouching by the port thruster housing, when his communication band signaled an incoming message. He glanced at it. The flag on the message was gold and blue imperial colors. He looked again. There was a Valerie imperial seal on his personal communication band. He sat down on the floor of the cargo bay because it seemed like the appropriate response. He looked at the seal for a while. Then he looked around the bay as if checking whether someone was playing a very unusual joke. No one was there. Just him, the shuttle, and the hum of the station. He opened the message. It was not long. It was written in simple language, the kind used when writing across species lines to ensure clarity. It told him that the author had been the woman in the cargo bay aboard the VSS Orden, the one with the head wound, the one he had carried out. It told him that she was the third heir to the Vale Fairy throne, a princess, traveling under a concealed identity on an inspection trip. It told him that she had kept his name and thought about what he did for 18 months. It told him that 3 days ago she had stood before the imperial court and told them what happened and why it mattered, and that as a result her mother, the Empress, had ordered a full and serious reassessment of how the Vale Fairy Empire understood the human species. The last 2 sentences of the letter read, "I do not know if you meant to change anything when you went back through the door. I do not think you did. But I wanted you to know that you did. Anyway." Cal read the letter once. Then he set his stylus down on the floor beside him and read it again. He was still sitting on the floor when Dana came back into the bay 20 minutes later, having resolved the loading dispute. She stopped when she saw him. "You're missing the departure window," she said. He handed her the communication band. She read the message. She read it again. Then she sat down on the floor next to him, which was not something she normally did in a working docking bay. And they both sat there for a little while without saying anything. "Well," Dana said finally, "I am adding this to the list of reasons I was right to let you do the stupid thing." Cal said nothing. He was thinking about what to write back. He wrote back. He kept it short. He said he was glad she had made it. He said he did not think he deserved credit for what she was describing, that from where he stood he had just done the obvious thing, the thing that was right in front of him, and he had been lucky that it worked. He said he was glad something good had come out of a bad day. And then he added one more thing. He wrote that in his experience, and he was a man who had spent most of his working life in the outer roots, far from anything important, doing ordinary work the universe did not hand out, meaning very often. Most days were just checklists and fuel costs and weather delays. But when meaning showed up, the honest thing, the only decent thing, was to take it seriously. He sent the message. Then he stood up, picked up his stylus, and went back to the pre-flight checklist. In the Imperial Library on Ithacus, senior analyst named Wren received the Project assignment the following morning. She read the brief twice. She noted the Empress's seal. She pulled the existing diplomatic summaries on humans from the archive shelf and stacked them on her reading desk. Then she opened the project folder and wrote the title on the front. She looked at the stack of material on her desk. It was already substantial, and this was only the existing summary level. The deeper records would be 3 times as much at least. The behavioral accounts alone could take months to properly evaluate. And this was the kind of project that, if done correctly, would be cited and revised and built upon for generations. Ren thought with the professional calm of someone who has spent her life in archives. This is going to take a while. She opened the first folder and began to read. Far out in the Delvin Reach, a cargo shuttle lifted away from waypoint 11 on schedule, heading toward the first of 4 outpost settlements with a hold full of supplies. 2 people were in the cockpit. One of them was already asleep in the co-pilot's chair. The other was flying, watching the stars, not thinking about empires or princesses or the slow turning of a civilization toward a new question. He was thinking about the weather systems near the second outpost and whether they would need to adjust the approach angle. Some things did not change.